Her many voices, her many voices, her many voices, her many voices.
Greetings. Hello, Jodi. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We're so happy to have you. Welcome, everyone, to our Her Many Voices Lunch and Learn event. And we're going to learn today some details about the Adelante Foundation. And we're very, very excited for you to be here, Jodi. I'd love for you to introduce yourself, perhaps before we introduce the foundation.
Sure. Yeah, I've been working in the international development space for over 15 years. I've worked with government contractors and foundations and nonprofits in a variety of different humanitarian efforts, global health, education, anti-corruption, climate finance, clean energy solutions, and microfinance.
Great, awesome. And then Adelante Foundation is primarily working in Honduras. We'd love to hear a little bit about that, as well as how it was founded.
Sure, yeah, and in clarification, we work solely in Honduras. The foundation was launched shortly after Hurricane Mitch in 1999. The devastation to the region was horrific, and the founder had spent his growing up years in Honduras. And although he wasn't currently living there, he got in touch with friends that were on the ground and said, "Look, I want to help. It looks like there's a lot of disaster relief happening. What are the long-term potential strategies that we can do?" And the more he learned, by connecting with those people on the ground, the more he learned about just different types of development solutions, the more he realized that microfinance was one of the most powerful ways to enable communities to recover from those kinds of climate impacts.
Microfinance is so important. It's really impactful. So that is amazing. You know, I want to point out for our listeners, because Her Many Voices, we have a very similar origin story. Our founder, Alicia Fall, was inspired to start this nonprofit after the earthquake in Haiti in 2012. So it's a very similar thing. Isn't that, it's amazing that that people are so inspired when these things happen, and then so much good will come afterwards, right? It's amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of great work happening in the immediate aftermath. I think what happens is after that first few months or first year or two, there's still so much that deserves and needs attention.
Yeah, definitely. In the case of Her Many Voices, I know Alicia went to Haiti many times and has partners there, and they actually built schools and literally did so much work there on the ground. Can you share more about kind of the beginnings of the organization?
Sure, it was before my time. But yeah,
Yeah.
when we first started doing the work, we really did a lot more focus on microfinance that occurred in solidarity, small group loans. We found that we also, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Grameen Foundation or Grameen Bank. But they were Muhammad Yunus, who had founded it in Bangladesh, was one. He received a Nobel Peace Prize laureate for his work. And I think that microfinance really was considered this panacea to poverty at the time. But we were a Grameen Bank replicator. And so we did the majority of our loans at the time in solidarity group loans, meaning that in groups of 5 to 8, women would be responsible for one another's repayments if one of them defaulted, which was it was a great way to start. We have found that over the last 5 years plus, we've seen a lot more of a shift to individual loans. And I think that's for a few different reasons that I'm happy to go into later. But essentially, especially in less rural areas, women who don't have a rapport with one another, that model isn't quite as effective.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating. Of course, you'll have to consider the culture of the place and the people to make that happen. Yes, I know Muhammad Yunus is really given credit for starting the whole microfinance revolution. And that's amazing. It also is very much, usually in most places, and including with you in Honduras, really specifically for women. Why is that?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, at least in the developing country context, women are known statistically to be better stewards of funding, reinvesting profits into their families than their male counterparts.
Hmm. It's one of those
So we
things where the
find
women
that,
are, they're
oh,
tied
go ahead.
into everything, right? They're tied into education, and they're tied into, like you said, family, food. Um, and I think that people kind of, it's pretty well known, and a lot of people say this, that investing in women is the way to really impact the future in the greatest way possible. So
Yes.
yeah, we talked about earlier, when you and I were prepping for this call, we talked a little bit about how all these other areas are all tied together. Education is tied to sustainability of the planet, which is tied to health, human health, and food and agriculture. Um, but a really impactful point was that the microfinance, if you can solve that side of it, that does affect all those other areas. I think that's a really important point. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah, the nexus between, other areas is really I mean, although microfinance may not be quite the panacea that people had hoped when it had initially rolled out, it definitely is a powerful poverty reduction tool. But in the process of making sure that women have access to finances and financial literacy, you find that these other conditions related to poverty naturally improve, access to education for their children, improved health conditions, increased resiliency to climate impacts and external shocks, et cetera.
Hmm. Hmm. That totally makes sense. So for you personally, why are you doing this work? Do you have an experience, a life experience that wanted you to do this kind of thing?
Yeah, I lost my father when I was a teen, and I think that realizing young that life is short, I really wanted to do something meaningful with it. I elected to go to Cairo for a year to study abroad in college, and to see poverty on that scale was really mind-blowing. It inspired me to really understand the root causes of poverty. And so after returning to the US, I was trying to consume as much as I could as it related to food security and poverty reduction. And I went on to get a graduate degree in international development. And although my interest at the time was more related to food and health, I started taking courses on economic development, and the more I learned about microfinance, the more excited I got about that solution.
Hmm. Yeah, and how impactful it is in all the other areas. Um, so was there someone you met there? Is there was there an experience of like seeing something in particular? Could you share more about that? I think that's really, those stories are so helpful to understand, the whole
Yeah,
topic.
so the program that I was doing for study abroad, we had the option to live in the dorms. And it just didn't feel right to me. I was like, if I'm going to live here, I want to live amongst the people. And then that came with a whole host of, well, we need to make sure you're in a safe. Needless to say, that was back in the later 90s. And it was one of those situations where I, I found some other people in the program that wanted to do the same. And, walking almost a mile to school every day, I had to wear what the locals were wearing. But the population in Cairo is quite dense. And I mean, everywhere you were bumping into people who, and I was going to school with people who had the privilege, they were from all over, a lot of them from the Middle East. But I felt that there's a big disconnect between the wealthy people who were able to attend that school and then everything else that I was doing in my daily, going to the grocery store, getting, my landlord, et cetera. And just the level of poverty. I mean, I met a lot of wonderful people. And I had to learn some things the hard way too. I would kind of wash my hair in the mornings because it was so hot. And also I was like, oh, it makes my hair look darker. I didn't feel comfortable wearing the hijab. I just felt like if I didn't share that religious association, that wasn't an appropriate thing for me. I know that some people chose to do that. But I also didn't realize that when you walk out with wet hair, that it implies that you've just engaged in some untoward behaviors that.
Oh my goodness. And it's not part of our culture. So how would you know?
Yeah. So needless to say, there were things like that.
And how did you find out? Someone at school told you eventually?
I had a roommate who was from Jordan. And so one day we were walking to school together and he had overheard them talking, and he didn't realize, I guess, that wasn't the thing, or at least in his Jordanian experience. But he was like, oh my gosh, they think you're.
Oh,
I don't want to
so
say
great that he told you, right? It's so great that he told you. So I'm intrigued with this idea that that you literally went to school with all different kinds of people, and a lot of people from that part of the world were still your socioeconomic class, right? But there were still these uber wealthy people who were at school with you, and you noticed like how your lives were different.
Yeah, I felt like I identified more with the people in my community than I did with the students at the school.
Oh, most of the students were wealthy students.
Yeah, I'd say like 90% of the students were from different Middle Eastern countries that could afford to go to that school, whereas there was, maybe like 24 international students that were from the US, or I shouldn't say international, 24 like study abroad students who were maybe more a reflection of my socioeconomic background. But
yeah. And not to say, I mean, of course, there's amazing, wonderful, wealthy people out there as well, as we all know. That's not to disparage wealth in general.
Of course.
But yeah. So these life experiences really create who we become. And I think that's really, really important. Do you what else can you share with us? Oh, I know we need to dive into sort of the mechanics of a little bit more so that we can learn more about how the microfinance works for you. Should we do that now?
Sure.
Yeah, well, I really just have a very superficial understanding about that. Would love to learn more.
Yeah. So, I mean, microfinance, the term implies both microcredit, so micro loans, combined with education and training. So with the microloans that we offer, it's not just for working capital so that women could start and grow businesses. Our average first-time loan in Honduras is usually in the $200 to $300 range. Traditionally, that's a loan term of 6 to 10 months. For any of our agriculture-related loans, that's usually 12 to 18 months, just because the return on investment takes longer. We do offer additional loans that range from things like home improvement. For example, if they have a leaky roof, a lot of the women that we work with are working in the informal economy. And so a lot of them are working out of their homes. So we do have things like water and sanitation loans, home improvement loans, as I mentioned. We also do education loans, meaning that any of our return borrowers, if they have children and they're struggling to get their children to school, although school is free, there are other costs associated, such as, books, uniform, transportation to get to school, materials, et cetera. So we do like $50 to $100 loans so that women can get their kids in school. But the majority of the loans that we provide are for working capital so that women can start or grow loans. And our parameters are really, we do not permit, our target is to help women who are vulnerable, that are underserved. that cannot get loans from a traditional banking institution. So, for example, the women we work with don't have collateral, they don't have a credit history. So that's who we traditionally work with. We also don't, we often provide women with ongoing, so they may qualify for a $200 loan to start. If they successfully repay that loan, then they are qualified to borrow again, assuming that the purpose of the loan is still related to, the activities that we are willing to lend for.
Yeah, great. And you have a pretty big organization. You have staff in Honduras. How many people are there, and how does that work?
Yeah, we have almost 50 Honduran staff. We traditionally serve anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 women per year, depending on the size of our loan pool. We were serving consistently 8,000 women for a few years until COVID hit, and now we're back down to closer to 4,000, just because our loan pool did take quite a hit. Wait, sorry, can you ask the question again?
No. Yeah, that's great. I was just asking about, how big the organization is and how
Oh,
many people. That's perfect.
yep.
And actually, I'm curious now, how did COVID affect the program?
Well, we had not just COVID, but shortly after COVID hit, 6 months or so after, we had two hurricanes that hit the country.
Mm,
So on top of the struggles associated with COVID and the fact that they were not getting the vaccine, they didn't get the vaccine in Honduras till much, much later than the US and other industrialized countries. So having that natural disaster hit was just devastating for a lot of the women we work with. Hundreds of women that we work with lost their homes. Much more suffered other types of indirect consequences. So we did a lot of restructuring of loans, in some cases just forgiving loans entirely. But that, of course, then meant that our loan pool was impacted. Last year, we were, kind of closer to our previous years, but we, even with a $1.6 million loan pool, we're still, with on an average 6 to 10 month loan term, we're still usually distributing on a given year. Last year was $2.5 million in loans. So yes, we were very concerned about being able to keep our doors open, but we also gained a lot of the way our staff pivoted. And when I say staff, there's like almost 50 staff and they're all Hondurans. I'm the only gringa that is a support, kind of in the US and writing grants and helping with outreach and connecting with donors and things like that. I love doing things like this. I love presenting to groups and Girl Scouts or schools or, but yeah, there was a lot of negative impacts, but at the same time, we were doing things like getting things online so that our well-being officers who regularly connect with the women were able to connect with them via phone. And we were starting to do some, it just kind of fast forwarded some of our tech pieces. We're very lucky to have a really strong tech team. So what we're able to gather in terms of information online, and we even have like GPS that follows our well-being officers so that we can ensure that they're safe, but it also allows for greater ability to monitor and support. So yeah, it forced us to kind of get something, and like our education pieces, right? It helped us to like, okay, we need to get this information and online modules so that the borrowers of Adelante are able to gain access to this information without having to meet in person.
So all those tools got ramped up. Do you have any stories that come to mind, like a success story of a loan that you can share, something specific?
Oh, sure. Yeah. When I go to visit Honduras, which is usually on a quarterly basis, I usually shadow a well-being officer for a day. And sometimes those are surprise visits, sometimes they're scheduled visits. Yeah, we have a lot of women who have been successful. I've even met some women who were daughters of former borrowers,
Oh,
so
wow,
that
that's
they,
amazing.
learned about what their moms were able to do, and then they started their own enterprise. Yeah, I've seen different, we have women that participate in a range of different types of activities. Some of them are in retail, some of them are in food or restaurants or meat preparation or make tortillas or have bakeries. We have some that are, work on farms or have small or own small farms. But yeah, there's a couple of different women that kind of I regularly follow up with, but there was one that kind of stole my heart on my last visit where we were visiting her. She lives in an area outside of El Progreso, which is kind of in the center of the country, and she had a used clothing store. So she would buy clothes or let people donate clothes, and then she would resell that. And when we were visiting with the well-being officer, we always ask certain questions about how the business is doing, how she and her family are doing. But when the well-being officer stepped out to take a phone call, I looked at her and I said, "Well, how are you doing? Like, how are you not the business, but how are you doing?" And she just welled up and she said, "I lost my twin sister less than 6 months ago, and it's just been really hard." And we hugged, and she just given that the norm, I mean, the 70% of the population live in poverty. Given the normal challenges associated with the lives of the women we work with, and you add like COVID and natural disasters and losing family members, and the fact she was just like, "But what gets me up in the morning is this business. It gives me a sense of purpose. It gives me something to live for and be excited about." And it's just so beautiful to see they're just such a source of inspiration.
Yeah, yeah. And what was her business? I think you said, but
Reselling used clothing.
oh, yes, you did. Yeah,
So
yeah.
she would do
Great.
that
Yeah.
from her home, but she would also take the clothing to market. And yeah, one of the loans that we had provided was so that she can purchase a space at the market so that she could go to a Sunday at, just so that she could increase her clientele.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I'm just really struck by how big a difference you're making, in the lives of all these people. And it's local, you're in one place. This kind of work has to be local, and that's where you're making a difference. Sometimes we've got this kind of global view or this world view where we try to make these statements about everything and everyone, but it's really not relevant for everyone. In the end, we all live someplace, right? We're all planted somewhere, and our lives are different from people's lives in other places. um, Not to, and then you also tied in, of course, like 70% live in poverty. That's just one of those places, like that. I know that in Guatemala, Friendship Bridge is an organization that's doing microloans. They're very similar to what you're doing in Honduras. So, you have to be in certain places, right?
Yeah, and we find that we don't even do any marketing. We just everything's kind of word of mouth. We have 5 different branch offices located throughout the country, and we find that the model works good because by word of mouth, the borrowers that we're currently working with suggest it to other people they know in their circles. And so they automatically have a certain trust because they're being referred by a friend. But then we also have a certain volume of trust because we already have a relationship with the respective borrower who's recommending the other person. So we find that, we don't have necessarily the interest or even ability to reach, millions. It's more, let's do this the right way and let's serve the women who we know really need it. And yeah.
So if someone hears about it from their neighbor and they want to learn more, they go to one of these 5 locations and then meet with one of the well-being officers, and then they apply. Can you share more about the process?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, they don't have to go to the branch office. So we have usually at any respective branch office, we have anywhere from 4 to 6, 7 well-being officers. And of those well-being officers, they're formally like a lot of people are more familiar with the term credit officer. But
Mhm.
because our well-being officers are involved in so much more than just deciding and doling out funds and collecting funds. They really are exist to have a relationship with those borrowers. But any given well-being officer has a geographic kind of area that they're given, and anywhere from 100 to 200 women, depending
Mhm.
on their you know capacity and their stage of development as an officer. Excuse me. And at which point they are responsible for checking in with those women at least monthly. And
Mhm.
that's traditionally in person. So visiting them at their place of business and or home if that home is their place of business. I have at this point, 2 years in, shadowed several different well-being officers over my visits. And I'm just, they act like they're family. I mean, there's hugs, there's cajoling, there's joking, there's, hey, let me make you a little cup of tea, or, there's just a very familial type of relationship that I've witnessed between the well-being officers and the women we work with.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I know you already talked about the terms, 6 to 10 months or 12 to 18 for agriculture and that kind of thing. Um, is there an opportunity for people to actually experience some of this? You have is there a travel program that you offer? And is it open to the
We
public?
do. We often get the question like, "Do you operate like Kiva?" In fact, we've accepted funds from Kiva in the past and, provided them with the information, photos, et cetera. But when we get support from Kiva, that's in the form of a loan. So we much prefer to do grants, just because then we can when with a 97% repayment rate that we have, we can reinvest those grants to serve more women going forward. But yeah, we do what we call impact tours, where um, typically, like once a quarter, we'll provide either 5 to 7 day trips that usually either start in San Pedro Sula or middle of the country, and then kind of culminate in Roatan or vice versa. Roatan's an island. We try to do a good combination of, visiting clients, visiting offices, visiting the headquarters, but also, make sure that there's some days of rest and fun and exploration. We have some beautiful locations that we have relationships with at hotels that are in the jungle. Then we have eco resorts. And so people will sometimes do things like hiking or going to waterfalls or swimming in the rivers or going horseback or any things like that. And we like to kind of end in Roatan because then if they want more than a day there, they can just add some additional days to their trip. I'm personally going to be moving to the country in August for a year. So I also am trying to help people who may already have existing itineraries in Honduras, but then just add like a half day or a full day to accompany our well-being officers. And in some cases with me. And then we're also doing a pilot program in Roatan that we're hoping will start in the fall of this year, so that if for the people who don't want to take the ferry or a short flight into the mainland, they can still kind of see some of the work that we do in progress.
Great. So there's several different options, different lengths, kind of an average of 5 days or so, but then they can also do other options. And then do they have to speak Spanish?
No, I'd say it's great if, like for the trip I'm doing in June, for example, we have 8 people. We like to do 8 to 12 people, keep them small groups. We have at least one person who's bilingual. My Spanish, I'm going to be accompanying this particular group, but there's also the option to, we have a partnership with Intrepid Travel. So we also offer things through them, and they have guides that are bilingual. And or if people are comfortable, we're willing to just say, hey, add one day to your itinerary. If you have a bilingual speaker, great. Otherwise, our Honduran staff are not bilingual. So we usually either work either a company or we have like a third party, but we can work with, depends on the situation.
Yeah. Um, that's That's awesome. I know it's so great if people are able to speak Spanish or even try out their Spanish, right? When they're
Yeah.
there. What kind of feedback have you heard from people who've gone on the trips?
In the past, we've done a lot more kind of existing supporters and donors. Um, and so prior to
Mm,
my time, these happened more frequently. And then, of course, when I started, it was COVID. So I haven't facilitated. The one in June will be kind of the first one in a while. But yeah, I hear a variety. I think that most really enjoy getting to see the impact on these women's lives in person, right? Like we were just, for example, there with our board of directors, and one of the places we visited was a beauty salon. And you looking at this place, you're like, wow, this person looks like she's quite successful, but it's taken her years to get to that point.
mhm.
And then, some of the locations that we go to are, dirt floor pulperia where they're selling, kind of a variety of different products to the people in the community. And they're kind of barely making it, but I find that sometimes even the people who live under such challenging conditions are often just so delighted, so appreciative to be where they are and having access to these opportunities. So I
Mhm.
think, just seeing it in person just makes it just makes it more tangible, more real. You can ask questions that, about the respective pieces, and it just to be able to have that one-on-one directly with the borrowers is just a really neat and powerful experience.
So if they're already stakeholders, it really deepens their experience and their knowledge and their commitment, probably.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Just seeing
That's
how
amazing.
little can go so far.
Yes, and trips like that are life-changing. They really are. I know you spoke about your trip to Cairo, and that was kind of one of the things that made you want to do this. Um, I think that it's so important to be exposed to other cultures in order to sort of broaden our perspective, right? Broadening
Yeah.
our perspective is a more realistic view of the world. Um,
Yeah, and I think
yeah.
also, because I mean, I've visited a lot of different types of humanitarian projects over my years of working in this industry. But I think that because of I mean, microfinance by nature, right, is like you're empowering women to do something with funds that they already want to do. So the sense of like agency they already have over their own lives, to see like how much pride they take in that. It's not like we're going in and saying, this is what you need to do, and this is how you should
Mhm.
do it, and this is what like our money is required to be spent on. It's really, yeah. I just wanted to make sure to add that.
Yeah, yeah, there, and that's really important to as especially culturally to not go in and say we happen to be Americans, but we're going to tell you how to do it. It's so important to not do that and to acknowledge what they already know. Um, and so you're empowering them to do, as you said, like their own dreams for the future.
Yeah, I mean, really, if you look at, I mean, I think there's a lot more attention these days to white saviorism, and I think that there's a lot more people that already acknowledge that people that live in poverty truly have the talent, ingenuity, and strength to transform their lives if given the opportunity. So
Hmm.
that's kind of why we do what we do.
Hmm. And we've spoken a little bit about how the women are at the center. They have a voice. They are the ones who decide about these things.
Yeah, we try to make sure, like we're very fortunate to have a team that has spent a lot of time and resources on making sure that we're doing a really good job of monitoring and evaluating, not only to course correct when we're not doing things well, but also to make sure that we continue to do things that we are doing well, or to pivot or improve when needed. But making sure that the women have a voice, that they're regularly connected with, asked the appropriate questions, what's working, what's not working, allows us to kind of shift and ensure that we're meeting the needs.
Hmm. Hmm. And I know statistically, I think one statistic we did not talk about yet is the extremely high payback rate of the loans. What do those look like?
Yeah, we on the over our 20 plus year history, we have an average of 97% repayment rate.
That's astonishing. Can you have us, what's the normal repayment rate? Do you have any statistics to counter that? Or
I don't have that off the top of my head. I don't know. I do know that commercial lending institutions worldwide, it's abysmal the percentage that actually invest in women, and that's including industrialized nations. So they're just, in order to address that gender gap, and to ensure access to finances, not to mention financial literacy. There needs to be more organizations doing what we're doing. Unfortunately and fortunately, microfinance has become so popular that there are a lot of organizations that are offering these services, but they are for profit. And sometimes it causes issues because, like, when we first started, we were one of the only organizations in Honduras. Now there are several, but unfortunately, some of them have quite predatory lending practices. They could charge high interest rates. There's fees. There's major consequences if people don't pay on time. And so we make sure to educate the women that we work with. There are times where they will even borrow from ours and somewhere else, and that debt burden issue gets complicated fast. So we do, a portion of our education training includes covering information like that so that they really understand what they're getting into.
that just makes me frustrated, right? That I know that we live in a capitalist society and people can start their own for-profit company doing, many, many different things, but the predatory lending it's bad enough here in this country, in a developed world, but for it to be happening there as well is so frustrating to me. It's just one of those issues it's just not right. And I understand you're saying you're teaching them about it so they don't get caught in something like that.
Yeah, and I wish there were statistics to show how much migration happens, whether internally in the country or, other countries as well versus outside of country. But I do think, one of our goals is, if you give women what they need to have a successful enterprise in their most people don't want to move, right? So we do what we can to educate them on, make sure that you're going with, what's appropriate. And sometimes we have women who, may take 4, 5, 6 plus loans over the course of several years. And at a certain point, they have then established credit history to then qualify for traditional lending institutions, in which case we're very, supportive of that, as long as there are appropriate interest rates in that situation. But there are definitely loan sharks and other microfinance institutions that do not necessarily have the interests of the women, or people living in poverty in general. They don't have the best interest at heart.
Yeah. So it occurred to me to ask, is there a way to look up where these types of programs do not exist? Or, if somebody wanted to get involved, could they go to the, Grameen Bank and look into that? Or is there a different place to find that out?
Yeah, back in the day, we were able to get like Grameen Bank replicator status, meaning that we had sent several staff to get trained in their model. I don't know if they continue to offer that. There are definitely microfinance resources available. I know that we've even had people with small organizations in Honduras saying, hey, can you operate in our community? And for us, the way we currently work, we're in process of expanding into 3 additional communities, but sometimes there's communities where, it's too far from where our current operations are and the oversight is too challenging. But we're always willing to kind of share information about what's worked, what hasn't worked. But
yeah. So you mentioned something earlier that I'd love to swing back to and go a little deeper. You talked about, there is a perception sometimes of this white savior coming in. The white saviorism is a thing, and you're aware of it, of course. So what kind of things are you doing to sort of counter that, or make sure that perception is not tied to what you're doing? Because you're the opposite of one of those predatory organizations as well.
Yeah, we're set up so that we have a 501(c)(3) in the US that's governed by a board of directors that I work under the umbrella of. And then we have a locally registered Fundación Adelante, which is then and all of the implementing activities. So with the nearly 50 staff, et cetera, all of that is operated independently. We are kind of more of we help oversee and support, make sure that, the funds that we raise go directly to that organization. But yeah, it's kind of more like a partnership, the way that we're structured.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's the legal status, which makes sense. Do you experience that ever on the ground? Sort of like experiences where there's a pushback around the idea that you're going to come down and save us kind of thing? Or maybe you haven't had those
No,
experiences.
in fact, when we visit the borrowers, we make a point of, we don't say, "Oh, these are people who have helped support, the loan pool." We don't actually want our borrowers to know that, because then they think, "Oh, well, if
Oh,
these rich
yeah.
white people are giving money to this organization, why do I have to pay it back?" So it kind of
Yeah.
messes with our model of empowering them. So we don't go into that. And I'd say the majority of, we have a leadership team based in La Ceiba, which is where our headquarters is located. So we twice a year get physically together, once in the US and once in Honduras, with our board of directors and the leadership team. And we just kind of hash out, like, what are you guys having challenges with? They report on a number of fiduciary issues. We're very lucky to be a women serving organization run by women. The majority of our board are women, and the majority of our leadership team in Honduras are women. The general manager who oversees all of the operations in Honduras has been someone who started 12 years ago, Gabriela Puerto, and she started as an accountant. So she's very, financially savvy, where we have a lot of confidence in her, using the funds judiciously. If anything, she's very cautious. We'd like to sometimes see more risk. But we understand and always kind of defer to their expertise, knowledge on the ground. So there's a very wonderful, and again, I would say familial relationship that tends to. We have had some board members who've been on the board since inception, and then a lot that are newer. But we're very fortunate to have a very well-qualified team, both paid staff locally, as well as the people who serve on the Adelante board.
That's great. Is there anything that surprised you as you've been doing this work?
Surprised me, huh? I can't say that there's anything that has been surprising per se. No.
Yeah, yeah. Or like a moment in time. I know we talked a little bit about some of this already, but um, was there a pivotal moment in time when you realized, and maybe this is back to Cairo, or you're losing your father, right? A pivotal moment in time when you just like knew this was your life's work?
Oh gosh. I mean, yeah, I feel like I've been very fortunate to have something that that is purpose driven. I know that not everyone has that in their life. I will have to say I was surprised to learn of a statistic, and I might have already shared this with you, but that I have some people who kind of are in my life that have said, "Gosh, this is so amazing that you get to make this your life's work," and I always am like, I I know so many people that are that support the organization, or they're involved in some capacity. And I had heard a statistic that said, like, less than what we spend 5% of our time and resources on is often what we attribute to over the majority of our fulfillment and
Mhm.
happiness. So I always kind of like, yes, I'm very grateful to do the work I do, but I always tell people, you don't have to make this your life work in order to enjoy and appreciate and benefit from. You can volunteer, you can get involved. There's whether it's with Adelante or other organizations, there's so many ways to plug in. I mean, of course, organizations like ours always appreciate and welcome financial support, but there's so many different ways to plug in. And although we may not be an organization where it's like Habitat for Humanity and you can go and build a building, there's still so many different ways to plug in. And we recently started like an Allies of Adelante program where people could kind of choose from a menu, whether it's like a ad hoc or kind of regular thing. And we just think it's such an important way to connect with the bigger world that we live in.
The menu is ways that the people can support the organization.
Yeah, some of it's really basic and about raising awareness or just learning, like the Allies of Adelante, like it's like a little packet. You can find it on our website, but essentially there's things like, oh, okay, if you have a book club, choose this book, and either myself or an Adelante board member can either meet in person or chime in over Zoom or something, and make sure to help connect like some of the pieces of that book to the realities in places like Honduras. Sometimes it's so like, that's more on the like just learning side of things. Yeah, we've had people who are like, hey, I really want to do like a wine tasting or a tea tasting or something, but I want to, but I want an organization to benefit from it. Can we, there's all kinds of different, there's a slew of options that are
Right.
in the menu.
Okay, for all of us book readers, what are a few books that you'd recommend?
Oh gosh, that's also listed in the packet. Half the Sky is one I can remember off the top of my head. Are you familiar with that one?
Kristof. I am. Nicholas Kristof
Yeah.
and his wife wrote that.
Banking to the Poor. There's several. Yeah.
Can you think of any fiction that's, just like relevant?
Let me get back to you on that. I know that there are. I
Yeah.
I just can't think of any off the top of my head.
Like, I love historical fiction, right? Like it's very, very specific. And
Oh gosh, yeah, me too.
so I'm going to restate the statistic you just gave a minute ago, about 5% of what we invest in or in for individuals actually is what we're most fulfilled by. Right? That's so amazing. It really sounds, I think that's right. I work with a nonprofit in Panama that's a nature preserve, and they do education around what we can learn from nature. And certainly that I just get so much from my work with that organization. Going to Panama and being in the jungle, similar ecosystem to what you have in Honduras. So that's amazing.
Yeah, volunteering is a great way. I know that for us, we sometimes have we have committees, like we often are in need of certain ad hoc things like support with social media or so sometimes people like raise their hand to help with some very specific projects over the course of a month or a year, or there's great ways to plug into Adelante or other organizations that have a mission that you're passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also working with a nonprofit based here in Denver that works nationally called Global Minded, and we're connecting first generation and students from high school through to college into careers and helping with that whole pathway. And we all have our reasons for doing the work that we're doing, right? It's really amazing. Well, I love your work, and I'm so excited about all this. Is there anything, I know you said you're moving in August for a year. What is something you've learned in Honduras or during this experience? And then I was also wondering, why is it just a year, or do you think you might stay, or like, what is it for you, personally? Why are you going?
I'm doing a year because I have a daughter, an incoming 7th grader. And as you know, middle school is fraught with. So I just felt like it was a really good timing. We will be living in Roatan, which is an island. I'm really hoping that her Spanish will improve. But because we'll be adding this pilot program on the island, I really wanted to be available to the well-being officer. We're not going to have a branch office there. We're going to do it as a satellite operation. So I'm really looking forward to being available, because even though you, for those of your listeners, you may have been there before, it has the most tourists see the beautiful parts and the touristy, the nice hotels, but there are just huge pockets of people who are living in poverty and suffering. So I'm really looking forward to serving the communities there that need it. Yeah, I don't know if I answered. I feel like you had a multi-pronged question, but hopefully.
Yeah, I was wondering, the other part was just what have you learned by going to Honduras a lot? And then, so what have you learned? And also, how's your daughter going to do with all that? Is she going to love it? Or is she going to be like, forget it, Mom, I don't want to go?
I actually bring her out usually for a couple of weeks in the summers when we've gone. So she's already done 2 longer trips. I also have taken her on the well-being kind of trips where she's getting to like see how people live. And, we always encourage people to bring their children, because, it's so easy to be myopic in our worldviews when we have such privilege in places like the US. But, she's chasing their little ducks around, or she's, she's commenting on like, wow, like they don't have a working toilet, or they don't have, or these things that we take for granted. Right. So I think that, she kind of knows what she's getting into. But at the same time, she'll be at a school where there's going to be kids from other countries in addition to Honduras. And, I was able to sweeten the deal by saying you can foster some kitties.
Oh, awesome.
There's a local shelter on the island that we're gonna, I'm sure, volunteer with. So
yeah, that's gonna be so life-changing for her, right? All of this. I mean, obviously you've already taken her there and she's learned, experiencing a lot, but to have the chance to live there, someday she's gonna be having this conversation and she's gonna say, in 7th grade, my mom took me to live in Honduras. And it will be some pivot point for her, which I think is really beautiful.
yeah, and in terms of things I've learned, I think I would say, when financial literacy accompanies financial resources, people are much more likely to be successful.
Right. It sounds so obvious, but actually financial education is not great everywhere, even here, right? Financial education is really a big gap in our world.
Yeah, and I think that what happens is that, we all know what we know, and we often know what we don't know, and like can try to kind of bridge that. But there's this huge other area of like the things that we don't know that we don't know. So to have an organization like Adelante, where that well-being officer's role is to help the women identify what they don't know that they don't know, is super important.
Yeah, it really is. And that's a good thing for all of us to think about. What do I not know that I don't know, right?
Usually someone in your life has to tell you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Wow. That's a really important point for personal growth. Yeah, that's good. I lost my train of thought there because I got all absorbed in that. Well, I know that, we've got a few more minutes here. If anyone has any questions, please do put them in the chat wherever you're watching live. As you know, this recording will be up on multiple platforms as well, so people can come back and add their comments at that time. Let's see, is there anything we actually did not talk about at all? Here's your website, adelantefoundation.org. And is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to make sure we covered?
No, I just want to thank the listeners and to thank you. Her Many Voices is doing great work. I think that there's, a lot of, I feel like it's very easy for so many of us to get bogged down in the negativity. And, anytime you listen to the news or watch the news, I feel very fortunate to be working in an industry where I'm surrounded by people who are committed to solutions. And I just think that the more you surround yourself around, don't bury your head in the sand, but, look to the people in your life or organizations that are committed to solutions, because there's a lot of great organizations doing really important work.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I will mention, and here's that thread I lost, but I found it again, that Her Many Voices also does financial literacy training. That's one of our programs that we do. And so I just want to mention that as well and tie that in, because I'm sure some people are going to listen to that and say, wait, point that out, because we do that. And then how can people further engage with you? Is there a newsletter they can sign up for on your website? Looking at the information about the trips, of course, but how else can they further engage?
Yeah, you're welcome to reach out directly to me. But yes, our website has a pretty extensive section on like ways to get involved. I'm pretty confident that the Allies of Adelante information is also accessible through that portal. But if you ever want, I spend a lot of time behind my computer, so I'm always up for a in-person or virtual, chat, walk, whatever. So I'm always happy to connect with people live.
That is great to know. We have some really fun comments coming in here. Here's one. Gypsy Heart said, I love the book recommendations. Yes, me too. I'm always glad to ask that question. Desiree wrote, what an inspiring, I forgot to mute my phone, obviously. What an inspiring discussion. Thank you so much. So that's awesome as well. Well, we can't thank you enough, Jodi, for coming on and sharing all the important work that you're doing and a part of your personal story as well. And it's really inspiring for us to learn more about it. So thank you so much for being here. And please share this with people. There's so many people who are going to love this message, the deeper dive on microfinance, focusing on women and specifically the information about Honduras as well.
Thank
And
you.
we're directly in alignment with everything we're doing at Her Many Voices, as you know. So thank you so much.
Appreciate the time.